First record I bought, I think, was something by the Specials.
It was the music of John Barry. A lot of Bond themes on it. I was big on James Bond.
I think my first record I bought was Jimi Hendrix. What was it called? Purple Haze. Been doing Bob's Records down here for probably about 6 or 7 years now, I suppose, but I've been doing it online for probably about 10. But a lot of the records in their day were like £1, 1911, £1.50, £2, and now they're selling 3 or 4 times that value.
I think people are finally realising that if you've got something in your hand, you've got that item now, as opposed to before. You can't, if you've got a digital collection, there's no value there at all. You've actually got something that's valuable. I sell more vinyl now than I ever have done, and stuff sells that it never used to sell before. 80s stuff is really good now. Vinyl is very good, and the quality of it compared to CDs and downloads is a lot better.
My first record shop in 1976, and then went on to do 20 years market trading, and I've been making my own music for 45 years. I started off in a punk band, and then sort of folk rock, and then dance music.
Well, I first started liking music when I was about 12 or 13. The classics like Beatles and the Rolling Stones, and at the time Elvis Presley. I really remember Elvis dying exactly when it was, the 17th of August 1977.
It started when I was 18 months old. I used to use my dad's wind-up gramophone, and he had a collection of 78s, and I used to play them. It's the only way they could keep me quiet, basically. And it went from there. I bought my first record when I was 8, and I've been collecting ever since.
I used to go down record shop in Lower Richmond Road, Putney, and buy second-hand records. It used to be called the Odd Spot, and it was a great little place. A chap used to sit behind a desk with a little lamp, and if you took records in to sell to him, he would inspect them under his little lamp light and turn them over and say, yeah, you can have so much money for these records, or you can go and choose 3 or 4 from his collection in the room. So it was great. I loved it, and loved the smell of the records and vinyl. And
people of my generation are replacing records they had when we were younger, and we were persuaded to get rid of them when CDs came along. And I think for younger people, possibly the idea of a download code doesn't really work, because you don't actually get a physical object. A record is kind of like a work of art, whereas a download code isn't. And certainly for people my age, that's the case. I've only ever bought one download, and that was for someone else. And it's having something that you hold and look at, and you get the artwork and coloured inner sleeves and information you can read and all that kind of thing. So I think you actually hold something in your hands that feels like an event or a proper cultural object. That's kind of how I see that.
they hold their value, whereas CDs, which I've got here, they're all £3 each. And probably a lot of people have paid 10, 12, 15 quid each for them. When you've got a bit of vinyl in your hand, you know, you've got the art, and there's not much artwork on this one, but say for instance, Pink Floyd, and some of the artwork you've got on them is fantastic, you know. And some of them you get posters in them, and inserts and things like that, you know. And then you've got picture discs. When you walk away with the record, you feel like you've got something under your arm, you know, a silly little CD.
It's changing all the time. I mean, people bring stuff into me to sell sometimes, and I say, well, they were okay when it was released a few months ago, but then everybody buys it and then nobody wants it. But the classic artists will always be in demand, like the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, the Doors, the Who, anybody any good, you know, and Oasis up to the 90s, you know, all that sort of stuff. So.
I stopped selling records 15 years ago, but I'm aware through going to record shops and particularly resident in Brighton that there is a huge boom in vinyl. And I think it's worldwide because I sell on Discogs and I sell a lot of vinyl to Germany and Japan, places in Europe. So it seems to be a global thing. And I'm making a vinyl record with the music project I'm doing, and I'm recording it specifically for vinyl. I'm not going to release it on any other format because I want people to buy it rather than somebody buys a download and then, you know, endless other people have got it. So if you want it, you have to buy it on vinyl. That's the plan.
It's getting better and better now every week. You know, it's used to do. I won't tell you figures, but you know, I started off a little corner bit outside there, and then the chap who owned it said, "I want this little room." Of course, I had to pay extra for it, but yeah, it's great. It's booming now, and word gets around, and I advertise it in the Friday ad, and you know, local record fairs, and on my website, Bob's Records website. I've got my own website.
I don't agree with illegally downloads really, but downloads, I mean, everyone's come to accept downloads now. I mean, the Beatles, they were one of the last. The Beatles and AC/DC, they wouldn't let any of their stuff. First of all, they wouldn't let their stuff go onto iTunes, and now they finally agreed to let it go onto Spotify and stuff like that. So nearly all artists, there's a few artists still that won't, but it's just the way it is now. But I think coming into shops really and looking for stuff and finding a little bargain or finding something you weren't even looking for. You come in looking for a certain artist and you stumble across something else. That's the thing.
I think now if you want to sell your product, you play gigs and sell them at gigs, and the people I promote always bring a bunch of stuff with them, and very often if the audience have enjoyed them, they'll buy from the artist, and I've watched people buy loads of stuff from artists, so that definitely works. I think the industry is very resilient, and it had a good run, right from the 60s, probably for about 45 years. They were able to sell shed loads of stuff at vastly inflated prices.
If you'd buy an LP in them days, like Beatles or Rolling Stones or The Who or something, or Hendrix, and I always kept all those. But say you bought one and there used to be one or two good tracks on it, and you used to think, oh, I don't really want this, so take it back, and you could, you know, give it to him, swap it to him for some others, and come away happy man with some, you know, some good records. So it's quite a good thing in them days, but there wasn't all the exposure you get these days on the internet, and you know, it was just a local shop, you know.
When I was young, when I was growing up, there was record shops everywhere, but there are less and less now. But there are people opening up still. But I think it's great having a record shop, but it's getting harder to find records. You know, it's especially the original records. It's getting harder and harder to find them.
Because when I was in a punk band, we made our own product. I mean, we pressed it up, we made the sleeves, we actually printed them on an old duplicating machine. And I think that whole ethos started up with punk, and it's still going to some extent. So I think probably it is a British thing, yeah. And there was loads of independent record shops years ago, and there's more now. And just in the last 5 years, and I'm impressed that people are prepared to take that chance, because it's not easy. Particularly with vinyl, they're so expensive to buy that if you don't flog them, you're stuck with them. I think that's probably a bit of a problem for some people. And you've got to sell online as well. 40 years ago, there was no online. And I think the rise in vinyl is good for the music industry, but I'm not sure whether people who buy a Dell will necessarily go and buy vinyl. they'll probably buy a download or a CD, but it's still sales. She sold 30 million records in however long it was, 2 weeks or something. So there's obviously still the market out there. But possibly not for niche music. I think that struggles.
It's hard to say now. I can't think of any artists that are around now, new artists that are going to be around in 30 or 40 years. It's really hard. But then you couldn't say that about the Rolling Stones in the 60s. Would they still be around 50 years later? Yeah.
I think probably the last generation of musicians who will be remembered are people like Radiohead and Nirvana. I can't really see anybody breaking through like the Beatles. I don't think it's going to be another John Lennon or another David Bowie, and I think if one came along, they would probably be written off as interesting but not commercially viable. I think it's almost too much music, and I think, like when I was listening to David Bowie and particularly the Beatles in the 60s, if you wanted to listen to that record, you either had to, and you were going around to mates, you had to take it with you or rely on them having it. And even when cassette players came along, they were pretty crap, so you wouldn't really want to be recording it onto a cassette. So you actually had to buy the physical object, and that limited the amount of opportunities for copying and disseminating via other means. So I think that in turn meant that the artists who were successful, because they were selling shed loads of records, that was good, but there just wasn't as much music then, there wasn't the diversity. And the internet has connected us globally to all sorts of other musics, I think. I think the rise of world music and stuff like hip-hop, which is popular wherever there are people who are downtrodden or disenfranchised, has been really significant. But it doesn't generate kind of superstars that rock music used to. Very few of them anyway. I suppose Jay-Z might be remembered, actually, thinking about it, and probably Kanye West. But not in the same sort of way that the 60s lot were. It's changed quite significantly.